Another loss for the Phoenix Suns, though it was not without its bright spots. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, we'll break down another loss to the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Suns' seventh straight L, and what it means as we head toward the second half of this Suns season in the grand scheme of things. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons, and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. Thank you all for making Locked On Suns your first listen. Here on this Monday, welcome to the first full work week in quite a while. If that applies to you, welcome to another loss day for the Suns, which does apply to all of you. But either way, you are here, so thank you. If you're finding us for the first time, hit follow or subscribe on every single podcast platform out there. We are on all of them. Whatever one you are on, get this show in your feed Monday through Friday by just hitting that button down below. Brandon Dwayñas is here for his weekly check-in. I wish it was on happier terms, Brandon, for our second weekly spot here. Another loss, 112-98. The Phoenix Suns go down for the second time in a week to a Cavs team. I don't think there's any shame in losing to the Cavs, but we were talking right before, and it just feels like everything has to go kind of perfectly at this point in time for the Suns to have a chance in these games. They got an early lead, were scoring the ball pretty well to start the game, and then went down double digits in the first quarter, as they have almost every single game in this losing streak. And then all it took was one run by Cleveland in that fourth quarter to put the Suns away. And when they're down and it's late, they're just not going to come back. And so a little bit of a downer day, but at the same time, we want to talk about Dwayne Washington, who was the highlight. I'll let you take it in either direction if you have thoughts on the game overall, or we can just start with the positive stuff and get right into Washington, who had those 25 points.
So real quick, I think you kind of hit it on the head. They have to pretty much be perfect to pull out any wins, and teams are doing to them what they did to other teams last year, where, they could kind of hang around, maybe take a 5 to 10 point lead throughout the game. But when it comes to crunch time, these teams just turn it up a notch, and they have a closer or two, and they just put them out. So, without having Booker, it's just they don't have that guy, and Chris Paul going down certainly doesn't help. So I think just the combination of not having a closer and pretty much, like you said, having to play perfect basketball to close these games out is tough. And losing these 2 home games, I think, like we were talking about, they got to take advantage of their games at home because they don't have too many winnable games, and it gets tough. So, but yeah, I agree. Washington was definitely a bright spot. He's pretty much
actually real quick on that, on the game overall before we dive into Washington. You were saying they're doing, or they're having done to them what they were doing last year. I think that's an interesting way to put it. Did you see what Ish Wainwright said over the weekend? I think it was at shoot around, maybe before the Heat game, where or maybe it was practice on Saturday. He said that he still feels like they're kind of the hunted team, and he feels like that's an element of what's happening. Do you buy that, or do you just think that they're really bad right now? Because that was kind of surprising to hear him pull that out when it's like, you're injured and you're playing awful basketball. I don't know if you're really being hunted. It's not all that hard to hunt you right now.
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. I think teams, they don't forget what the Suns have done to them these last couple seasons. They've definitely blown some teams out and rubbed it in, and they're kind of sat at the top of the West there. So I think early on in the season, I think that was more applicable to this situation. But now that they're just kind of banged up, I feel like teams aren't even taking them as serious. Honestly, I kind of feel the opposite as of these last 10 games, where
Me too.
Teams are just kind of walking in the game thinking, we can coast for 3 quarters, and then fourth quarter, we could put them out. They just don't have enough offense.
You could see it from Donovan Mitchell, right? I think he only ended up having 3 points in the fourth quarter, but you could feel that he was saving himself for one last scoring burst if they needed it. They didn't even end up needing it because the Suns started turning the ball over in the fourth quarter, and Cleveland just the shooting luck kind of even back out. You know, the Suns got hot at the end of the third quarter, and then even in the second quarter, and then Cleveland just kind of was able to put it away. But Donovan Mitchell was, I think, perfect example. He only had 19 points in those first three. I don't think that they really felt like this Suns team was going to be too difficult to handle. I don't even know if you would say they were, even though it was a somewhat closer game than we've seen. But let's get to the positives. Enough on that. So Dwayne Washington, 25 points. I mentioned the outburst at the end of the third quarter to make it a close one. He had a few flurries throughout this game where he really, it felt like some of the best moments in that arena, like the types of runs we're used to seeing this team put together. And it was pretty cool to be there. It was pretty cool to see him kind of have that type of a moment. But then in the fourth quarter, 2 turnovers, and he was pretty critical of himself. It's not a finished product, but this guy's talent is just undeniable.
Yeah, definitely. And he was someone that the second the Pacers waived him, I tweeted out that, you know, the Suns should pick him up to take Elfrid's spot. And he didn't really take Elfrid's spot necessarily because he's on a 2-way, which is, you know, another added bonus where, you know, they could have a decision down the road where they might need to, you know, transfer his contract. So that's something to look at as well. I think he's earned that right to be in that discussion to get a official roster spot. But like you said, his offensive firepower is kind of, he's the only guy on the team that can do what he's doing right now in terms of swinging a game like that. And that is why Suns fans for so long have wanted Jones to go after someone that, you know, off the bench could provide that spark. So, you know, I think he's definitely someone that could be part of the future long-term. He's not necessarily a prototypical point guard where he's going to set the offense and distribute, but he can score. And, you know, we've seen him a few times this season now catch fire, and it's fun to watch.
Yeah. This was his 24th game played. 2 players can play 50 games. So it's not as if the time is ticking away right now, but obviously you always have that in the back of your mind. And we know 2-way players can't play in the playoffs. So if the Suns get to a point where they're in the playoffs, they would have to worry about his eligibility. Again, every time I say the word playoffs, I can hear the audience laughing and scoffing, but these are the things you have to think about. I think, though, with this game in particular, I mentioned some of the turnovers. That's going to continue to be a work in progress. I think the thing people need to remember that I feel like this game kind of showed us is, he talked about it post-game too, he wasn't really a point guard last season. And he was in Indiana. He produced at a pretty high level, but he definitely wasn't a typical, like, I have the ball in my hands all the time type of traditional point guard. And tonight, I actually thought a lot of his best moments came when he was getting the ball in a dribble handoff or coming off of a screen and making a play sort of with the defense already in rotation, or at least not having to just initiate everything, create something out of nothing. I thought that was a nice discovery tonight. Not that we didn't necessarily know it, because like I just said, that's kind of how he was used, but finding ways to do that with this roster, maybe when you do talk about down the road, when they get healthier, obviously Dwayne Washington's not going to be a 25-minute player, but maybe there's still a role for him doing some of the things that we've seen Shamet do or Damian Lee do, but obviously he has a little bit more creation ability than even they do. That was kind of interesting. You do have to strike the balance between, he's probably ultimately more of a point guard, so you want to give him those reps, but also how's he going to help the team now? I thought tonight was a little bit of both, and that's kind of cool to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think his ability to play off ball too kind of would be interesting to pair next to Booker in stretches when he gets back, and if they need an offensive boost, I think those two can work pretty well off each other where, you know, like you said, putting him in a position to succeed where he doesn't have to do a ton to initiate. I think him and Book kind of switching off on that could, at this rate, give them their best offensive guard duo, I would say, in terms of just pure, you know, ability to get buckets. We were hoping that's what Shamet would be, and he was for a little bit this season and has been in moments, but it seems like he's kind of fallen back down to earth. And but like you said, there's so many guards on this roster. Once Book and CP are back, it's going to be tough for Washington to get consistent minutes. So he's essentially going to have to play. He's not going to have to put up, you know, 25 points a game to keep his spot, but he's going to have to continue to be a facilitator and a tough shot maker to keep his spot in the rotation once they get healthy.
Yeah, and I think too, when you talk about how he's used and sort of the situations that he's best in, one of the things it's funny, frustrating, whatever word you want to use, is it's like he's another guard on this team where, yes, we're talking about all the things he's able to do that they don't have in other players, but at the same time, he is kind of similar to these other guys where he's still very reliant on his jumper. He doesn't really finish well at the basket. He doesn't draw a ton of fouls. I think that he has the frame and the craft at the basket to eventually do that, but it is like if he was a guy who, was just like a complete like Sonic the Hedgehog going to the basket, then I think I would be like way more certain he's going to get more minutes when these other players come back. But considering his style is very similar to Payne and Paul and Booker already, it's sort of like, yeah, he's really good at all those things, but is he giving you anything unique? I don't necessarily know at the end of the day. And then you take the fact that he does have these mistakes. I just hope that while these players are continuing to be injured, this can be one silver lining that, hey, that's the moment in the season when Dwayne Washington like really got to another level. And then when we look back and they do turn him into a full, real NBA contract, or they do, in the off season, give him a real NBA, whatever it is, it's like, okay, hey, remember that like January when everything sucked and he got really, a ton of reps and got way better. Like, I think that's the best you can hope for right now.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like you said, hopefully we look back at this and this is the low point of the season. I mean, it could get worse. I know we're trying to stay positive here, but it could get worse pretty quick too. So at the same time, and I hope we just look back at January and kind of say, remember when we were all doom and gloom and, this team gets healthy and they fire some wins off and get back in the playoff mix. But yeah, I think Washington's been one of those lone bright spots, and especially at his age, like he's pretty much their only prospect really on this roster that I think you can kind of look at and say he still has some upside. And if he can continue to learn from Chris Paul and Devin Booker, gets coached up by this coaching staff on, just picking up the little things, I think he's someone that could be a rotation player for sure.
You talk about the low point, and obviously injuries have a lot to do with that. Deandre Ayton might have sprained an ankle. We don't know what that will mean for him on the next road trip that they're embarking on now, but we have seen some new aspects to his game. He's talked about those aspects, and the 6 assists tonight illustrated that. We'll get into his development with the ball in his hands in the post next. First, today's show brought to you by TurboTax. Go to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Meet with an expert who will do them for you. TurboTax experts can relieve you from the stress of taxes. I've already been having to go back and say that was the wrong address. Please mail me the right form, all this stuff. It's a pain. We all know that. And TurboTax can file for you so you can do, well, anything but your taxes. Show your eyes things that are not taxes. Unpack a moving box of not taxes. Taste not taxes. Grab a saddle and ride not taxes into the sunset. Do anything else, people. That's the point. With the TurboTax 100% expert guarantee, an expert will do your taxes from start to finish so you can relax. Feels good to be done with your taxes, doesn't it? That's it. You just hire TurboTax and you're done. You don't even have to worry about when they actually are complete. Come to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. Intuit TurboTax, full service products, only video meeting while expert does your taxes is required. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Deandre Ayton had 14 points, 11 rebounds, 6 assists tonight, Brandon, in 30 minutes. I was a little bit frustrated that Monty waited so long to bring Ayton back into this game. We mentioned the run in the fourth quarter where everything sort of fell apart for the Suns. Ayton was not out there. I understand somewhat that it's not his normal rotation. I don't necessarily think he should have played the whole fourth quarter, but he was sitting at 27 minutes. He, even if he played the whole fourth quarter, that still only gets him to 39. He's been in the high 30s frequently this season. That was a little bit of a mistake, in my opinion. I don't know if it would have stopped and changed the whole, nature of the game, but he did play pretty well. And I think tonight, the way that he played, maybe I'm making it up. Maybe I'm looking for it more. Maybe I'm just seeing it more because he did a Q&A, an interview with Dwayne Rankin this week about his playmaking and sort of scoring and opportunities and where he's getting the ball, how he's getting the ball. But he did have those 6 assists, and you could tell there was a certain level of patience, I think, that he's starting to play with when he gets the ball in those positions, in the post, at the elbow, whatever it might be. He picked out a few cutters tonight. He found some shooters, but you could feel him waiting for the second defender to get there rather than just, premeditating his moves and turning it over, or the things we've seen him do in the past. What did you think of that element of his game within the loss tonight?
No, I think it's a great point to bring up, and not just because of the interview. I think he was making an active effort to kind of look for plays as they developed, instead of, like you said, just reacting as they happen with, a second defender, third defender coming. Because even when this team's full strength with all the offensive weapons they have, DA sees a lot of pressure, and he just demands a lot of attention off those roles. So if he can get to a point where he's making plays and getting 5-6 assists a game and just helping move the ball, and like the thing with him is he's a willing passer. Like, he's not someone that he's going to force anything. He's almost
overly, I think, sometimes. Yes, right?
Exactly. He's at times a little frustratingly like unselfish. But I think that also, could be a positive in terms of if he could really start to read the defense and pick them apart, especially with, Mikal cutting, Cam Johnson cutting when he comes back, just finding the open shooter in the corner, making an extra pass. He had a crazy catch tonight where he saved a ball from going out of bounds on the, like, near the baseline, and just whipped it back over to, I think it was Bridges, and who swung it to Craig or someone in the corner. They missed the three, but just plays like that I think are definitely a positive, and hopefully he could continue to develop in that part of his game. And I think that's something that can unlock a lot of fun stuff in the Suns offense if he can continue to get better at that.
The other thing that jumped out to me from that interview that I think we did see a little bit of tonight too, is I think his level of awareness. And it's always hard because everything has like 6 reasons it's happening, right? I mean, basketball moves really fast. The season's really long. There's not always going to be the same exact situation from game to game. One night, Ayton might not be getting the ball in spots he likes to because the guys can't make an entry pass effectively because their guards are all injured. And then another night it might be because he's not sealing aggressive. Like, it's never always just going to be one thing, but his awareness of all of those factors, I think, was pretty interesting when he's talking to Dwayne in that interview. And again, you could see it sometimes tonight. He's getting a mismatch against Isaac Okoro, and he's, sealing in the post, but you can see Evan Mobley's like 2 steps away. That rotation is going to come instantly. And I think there were some times where they were able to figure out what plan B is going to be a little bit faster. Now, I'm sure some Suns fans watch that and they're just as frustrated because they're like, okay, I don't really care what the reason is. He still needs to be getting the ball. I tend to agree, but I'm also able to look at that and say, if he doesn't have the skill set yet to be able to score when he's instantly doubled or when that help comes, then he should be part of the figuring out of what that plan B is. Go set another screen, go make a dribble handoff. And so I liked the awareness that he demonstrated there. I think a lot of it to me just comes back to, until he, and if he can ever actually handle the ball, manipulate a defense that way, he's not going to be able to do some of the things consistently that we see him do in spurts or that he might want to do. The best centers who can do all the stuff we talk about Ayton being able to do, which he can't yet, those are all-star level centers. Those are Embiid, Jokic, Towns. They can all dribble. Ayton still can't do that. And so I think that's still just standing in the way, as much as it might sound like I'm, repeating the same thing we've always been saying, that's still true for him.
No, 100%. And that's what separates like you said, that top tier of centers, is the ability to put the ball on the deck and give defenses a different look. If you're too predictable, you're going up against like the best scouts in the world. They know how to defend that. They know how to take certain things away, certain actions away, and, make you uncomfortable. And there's situations where Ayton will catch the ball and he just looks uncomfortable. And if he's not in rhythm. So I think teams know that. And I think he's done a great job of trying to figure out how to counter that. And like, it's a learning process. It's not going to happen overnight. But like you said, just making those dribble reads and, trying some new stuff, like, especially now with all these injuries, I think this is a time where it's okay to experiment a little and try some, and he has in certain areas, like we've already kind of talked about, but I think offensively, like, I would love to see him just, put the ball on the deck and just seek out contact. Unfortunately for him, the whistle he gets, and, maybe I'm biased on this one, but it just feels very much like he doesn't get a lot of leeway on when he's generating contact in terms of, it seems like everything's going to be an offensive foul. So he needs to figure out, maybe have some conversations with refs pregame and just say, like, I'm trying to, create contact without, running through people. Like, just maybe have some discussions with refs. So that's, you look at Embiid, you look at Jokic, they've mastered that skill at this point. So I think that's
and Embiid is just as out of control, if not more than Ayton is a lot of the time. You know what I mean? Like, it's not as if, it's reputation and it's, selling it, and it's using your body the way that it's going to look like their fault. There's all the art to it. That's not just a science, but it's not as if Embiid is, he's incredibly skilled. He's a freak, but it's not like, I don't think I would always say graceful is like the word I would associate with how Embiid plays. I think there's times when he's just overpowering and he forces the refs to get those calls. Suns fans hated it when it was Giannis, and I think there's some truth to that argument that we saw play out in the finals, but it's the same type of thing. And so, Ayton with the fouls is obviously a huge part of this. And
he needs to take some. Sorry, I was just because I need to take some acting classes or something, because his flopping is not good.
No.
Like, I'll just say that's, he can't sell stuff, and that is a skill. It's sad to say it. That's a skill of the NBA today, but it really is. So that's the next leap in his game. Get to the line.
Even if you go back to Shaq and whatnot, right? It's like guys would get just like completely flustered and overwhelmed trying to guard him because they're just like, I cannot do anything. He's stronger than me, and any contact, he is going to make it look like I just fouled him, and then he's going to get free throws, right? And so it's always been there, and you got to do it, and we'll see. But I was just going to close out by saying, too, like, whether it's Washington or it's Ayton, I think there has to be, I don't know. Maybe I'm being too much of a sap, but I do feel like we have to be realistic when you add the injuries aspect to this. We can talk about all these growth points and developments that we want to see, but I don't know. Imagine like anyone listening, their workplace or whatever. If it was like 5 people on your team are out on leave, and then they tell you to start figuring out how to like do coding or like learn how to do Adobe, or, hey, can you handle like the accounting department for the, like, you would not be adding new skills to your game at the same time that you're trying to compensate for everything that's missing. And so I think there is a little bit of balance there. And like, I know Suns fans don't want to hear that right now, but that's the reality. We can't expect them to hold the fort and try to just get a freaking win. And at the same time, hey, could you also like develop your game and become, 5% better by the time Booker comes back? So it's tough, but looking forward on that note, I think we want to wrap up this conversation by a little bit of conversation about where this team finds itself. This was game number 41. This is the exact halfway point now that this game is over. And I think we've been at an inflection point. As long as this losing streak continues, I don't know if the inflection point will be in the rearview mirror anytime soon. But do the Suns still need to look at this season as what can we do to improve our 2023 competitive chances? Or is it time to start thinking about, conserving those resources and thinking about what next season might look like? Not necessarily tanking, but just being realistic. We'll talk about that all next. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar out there. If you're looking for a delicious treat, but don't want all the fat and calories, you've got to try a Built Bar. We just got through the holidays, and I know a lot of people out there want to eat a little bit healthier as they look into 2023. Maybe you're just trying to recover from all the snacks and treats you might have eaten in the holiday season, or maybe it's something of a resolution for you. Either way, Built Bar is actually healthy and actually tasty. What makes them so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. They come in delicious flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond that make them taste like a real candy bar, not just the generic flavors that all the other protein companies put out, but these are unique. And they make them taste that way while maintaining amazing macros. Only 130 calories or so, 4 grams of sugar, 17 grams of protein. So they're packed with the good stuff, light on the bad stuff, and you can get them anywhere. We've been telling you about Built.com for a very long time, but they are now also at your local Walmart and Sam's Club. at every single location. And they have a distribution facility here in the Valley, so they'll be stocked up on your favorite flavor wherever you go. Head to your nearest Walmart or Sam's Club today, or check them out at built.com. Okay, Brandon. So I'm starting to see this chatter a little bit online, and I think it's reasonable. We're less than a month, I guess exactly a month from the trade deadline on February 9th. We saw the first little tiny trade between the Celtics and the Spurs take place. That didn't really open the floodgates yet, but it's just a matter of time. We're going to start seeing trades. And I think the Suns, they're now under 500. They finished the first half of the season under 500, which feels insane to say, but it's the reality. And I think fans are starting to wonder if, despite how excited we might have all been about a Kyle Kuzma deal, an Eric Gordon deal, Harrison Barnes, although he's not getting traded, is it worth it to give up a first-round pick or, in a bigger trade, somebody like Cam Johnson or whatever it might have been that we were all talking about throughout the whole first part of the year? Or does it maybe make more sense to conserve those resources and just say, we'll get as far as this roster. You make the Jay Crowder trade because you have to, but this roster plus a small Jay Crowder trade, let's just see what we can do. Not a lost year, not a tanking year, but just roll with it. Don't go all in, don't overdo it. Or do you still try to push all the chips in and really make a big push? Where do you land on that? Because I think that's a conversation James Jones has to be having with his staff right now.
Yeah, and it's crazy because like 3 weeks ago, I don't even think this is really much of a discussion at this point, but that's how quick things change. And it goes both ways, right? So like this team, just like everyone predicted, the Warriors and Suns are the two play-in teams here in January. So, the NBA is wild like that sometimes. But I think at this point, with the new information we have, I would say everything has to be looked at through a long-term lens. So if you're going to go out and make a Kyle Kuzma trade, you better re-sign him. You're going to have that resource to re-sign him where it's like, okay, he can help us this year. He can give us a boost, but he's also something we could see as a part of our long-term plans that, we like him as a 4 next in between Bridges and Ayton long-term. And this is someone that we're going to target for that reason. If they happen to get hot and string together 5, 6, 7 wins in a row and kind of reposition themselves, then that's just a plus at that point. I think right now the West is just chaos. Like you look at the 4 seed, they're 3 games back from having home court advantage in the first round, but they're also just a game and a half back from the 13 seed. So things could shift very quick in either direction. So I think anything you do, it should not be a rental. You should not give up a pick unless you're planning on bringing that player back for, whether they're under contract or extending them. And I think they also have to figure out what they want to do with Cam Johnson, or if they're going to pay him or not, because if they're not, then I think now's the time to make a move. Like let him come back and showcase himself that he's healthy a little bit. And, maybe that's a direction they go with a Kuzma trade where, they say they'd rather pay Kuzma than Cam or something like that, just to throw out a scenario. But for the most part, if you're dealing any future assets, you better be getting something that's going to be a part of your plans at least the next 2 seasons.
Those are all good points. And it is weird this year. I mean, it's like this a lot, but the players who are out there available, a lot of the reason that they're available is because they're expiring players like Bogdanovich, although he did get extended, but I think it's just next year. I think it's just a one more year thing. Kuzma, Jordan Clarkson, we've heard stuff about his contract extension and he's declined them. And so I agree. But we know the Sarver thing is out there complicating the tax dollars that are being added and even just getting a deal done. Talked about that a lot last week. We don't really know the full truth there. But I go back to the standings too, like you did. The fact that the Suns are, even though they're now underwater at number 8, they are still within very comfortable distance of Dallas at 4. I would say the top 3 teams have a pretty good comfort right now, but even New Orleans is only 24-16. That's only 4.5 games up on the Suns. The Suns this season with Devin Booker have a 60.60 winning percentage. Let's just say he comes back on January 30th. I feel like that's 30 games, 60% of 30. I don't know that off the top of my head. I should have done that math better. But it's a little bit less than 20. Oh, it's the same exact thing. 18 and 12 is what they are. So it would be another 18 wins. Does that get you back? Considering we're probably looking at a lot more losses between now and then, you're probably going to be something like 20 and 28, 21 and 29, whatever it is. 18 and 12, 60% winning percentage, those final 30 games. I don't know if that's getting you there, but I think it's close enough. And we know that if you host a play-in game and whatever, you're still in pretty good reach. I still lean toward, if the deal is there and you can use Crowder and you can use somebody like Cam Johnson or DeAndre Ayton or whatever and your picks, I think you still go for it. You owe it to Devin Booker. And to your point about you don't get somebody like Kuzma if you're not planning to extend them. If you went higher, if you went on a bigger player than Kuzma, somebody like, Siakam or Anunoby from the Raptors, whatever, you're also doing that with the future in mind. And I think that's kind of why the main ultimate reason, thinking through this, why I come down on the side of you do a big deal if the opportunity arises, is because it's actually not just about this season. We don't even know what the future will hold past this year with Chris Paul partially guaranteed, Cam Payne non-guaranteed, and a bunch of guys expiring between Saric and Crowder and Craig. So you want to build going forward also, and there are these limited amount of time you can cash this stuff in. Saric and Crowder and even Shamet, who I think next year is his last guaranteed season. You have those salaries and they don't just last forever. So yes, this season it might not pay off for you, but down the road, you do it. It's like kind of what the Warriors did with Wiggins, right? They had a little bit of a lost season. They get Wiggins in at that point. Then by the time they're making a finals run, he's a huge part of that. So I know that's a long way of thinking about it. It's a complex thing, but I still think if somebody like Anunoby or Siakam becomes available, I don't look at it as, well, if they're not helping you win a title this year, it's a failure. I look at it as, well, that's a piece you could continue to build with. Like you said, you have to plan on paying that player, whether they're currently under contract or you would have to extend them. You're doing it with more than just this season in mind. And so that's kind of where I ultimately come down. If you're asking me, should the Suns go out and trade a bunch of stuff for somebody who they don't think they're going to re-sign? No, but that would be kind of dumb anyway for most teams, unless you really think you're going to win a championship. Like Denver should do that, but I don't know if anyone else should, but that's where I think the Suns are.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think there are some teams that kind of line up as good trade partners, like we mentioned, the Jazz, the Wizards, these teams that are kind of flirting with mediocrity and would rather tank and try to sell high on some guys that probably won't be a part of their long-term plans. And we've seen that Vanderbilt-Beasley combination get thrown around too. So that's another one where, I'm pretty sure both those guys are under contract for another season as well. So any trade like that, or on a larger scale, like you said, with Siakam, if you go out and get a star like him to pair with Booker, then I think you got to do it at this point. But any short-term moves with, the eyes on, this is our year, I think that conversation is completely faded where, like I said, a month ago, like that was still in the deck. So it's just kind of slowly falling apart, and they just have to try to steal as many wins as they can in the meantime and just stay afloat. That's what it comes down to. It's stealing wins and just counting down the days till Booker's back and taking advantage of an actually a little bit easier schedule around the time that he's projected to come back. So that helps. Yeah. So they could, like I said, this team could rattle off 7, 8, 9 wins in a row at full strength pretty quick, and that changes things. But again, there's no guarantees with health either. So it's just they're in a very tough spot right now.
No, that's actually a really good point. I think I was doing that kind of, quick math, and I think the games that the Suns were playing, one, Chris Paul was out for a lot of the games when Booker was healthy. So if you assume Chris can stay relatively healthy the rest of the year, I think that helps. Plus, like you just said, the schedule would definitely help too. And if he were to come back sometime on that 2-game homestand, the 30th and the 1st, they go on the road right after that, but it's Boston and Brooklyn. But besides that, it's Detroit, Atlanta, Indiana. And then when you come back home, you have the Kings, you have the Thunder, you have the Hornets twice over the next month, Chicago, Oklahoma City again. So yeah, their schedule eases up at the same time. So I guess you could look at that as a little bit of good timing in its own way. I guess you would prefer for Booker to have missed the bad games rather than the good games. But either way, you kind of are lining up to be able to make a run if you want to. All the guys in that locker room are going to have confidence they can. They've done that before. It's just TBD on if the health can get there. We just talked about Deandre Ayton. He had a little bit of an ankle thing. Hard to know how long he'll miss. He tends to miss a couple games usually. It's not a long-term thing typically, but it's also not I'm back the next game. So we might be looking at another guy missing. Campaign's not going to be reevaluated for 2 weeks. That came out after he re-aggravated his injury against the Miami Heat. So Steele wins. I think that's the best way to put it. But that'll wrap us up for today. That is Brendon Dueñas. You can read him at Bright Side of the Sun. He'll be back next week. In the meantime, hit subscribe or follow. Get the rest of our shows Tuesday through Friday of this week. And go make Locked On Sports Today your second listen on this Monday to get caught up on everything else going on around the whole world of sports. The football playoffs are locked in. That show available on all podcast platforms. And I will talk to you all tomorrow.